Every single stop sign on the planet is shaped like an octagon, not a circle, not a square, not a triangle. An octagon specifically, with exactly 8 sides. And once you actually stop to think about it, that's a strange choice. Out of every possible shape engineers could have picked, why this one? Why not something simpler, like a plain red circle or a red square? Today we're digging into the surprisingly deliberate reasoning behind one of the most recognized shapes on Earth, and how a decision made almost exactly 100 years ago still controls how you drive today, whether you've ever noticed it or not. To understand why the octagon exists, you have to go back to a time when stop signs didn't exist at all. In the early 1900s, cars were a brand new invention on American roads, and there was absolutely no standardized way to tell drivers what to do at an intersection. Every town did its own thing. Some places used hand signals from police officers. Some had nothing at all. The very first stop sign most historians point to went up in Detroit, Michigan in 1915. It wasn't red, it wasn't octagonal, it was just a plain white square with black lettering that said stop. And that was the entire design philosophy at the time. Slap the word on a sign, in whatever shape and color happened to be lying around, and hope drivers noticed it in time. If you can imagine driving through a city in 1915, this was genuinely dangerous. You might approach an intersection and have no idea what kind of sign to expect, what color it would be, or what shape it was. Every town was reinventing signage from scratch, which meant drivers were essentially learning a brand new visual language every time they crossed a city limit. This inconsistency wasn't just an inconvenience, it directly caused accidents, especially as more and more cars started sharing roads that were originally designed for horses and carriages. A lot of credit for pushing this problem forward goes to a traffic engineer named William Phelps Eno, who's often referred to as the father of traffic safety in America. Eno is credited with pioneering ideas like one-way streets, taxi stands, pedestrian safety islands, and organized traffic control long before most cities had any of these things. Eno recognized something that seems obvious now but wasn't obvious at the time. If every city has its own random system of signs, none of it works. Drivers need a shared visual language that means the same thing everywhere, the same way a red light means stop no matter what country you're in. Thanks to the momentum his work built, engineers across different states started collaborating instead of working in isolation. This collaboration eventually led to a group called the Mississippi Valley Association of State Highway Departments, a coalition of engineers from states across the American Midwest. In 1923, this group sat down and did something nobody had really done before. They created an entire ranking system for road sign shapes, based purely on how dangerous or urgent the situation was. Here's how the logic worked. A circle was reserved for the single most dangerous situation drivers could encounter at the time, which was a railroad crossing, because a mistake there could mean getting hit by a train. Simple rectangles and squares were used for signs that gave general information or directions, things that didn't require the same urgency, like a speed limit or a street name. Right in between those two extremes sat the octagon. It was chosen specifically for the stop sign because a stop sign needed to feel more urgent than a basic rectangular information sign. But the situation wasn't quite as catastrophic as an oncoming train. The octagon became the visual middle ground between casual information and full emergency danger. Here's the detail most people miss. The engineers weren't just picking a shape at random from a hat. They were solving a very specific visibility problem. In the 1920s, headlights were weak, roads were often unlit at night, and reflective paint hadn't been invented yet. This meant that in a lot of situations, especially in fog, rain, dust, or darkness, a driver might not be able to read the actual word stop on a sign until they were dangerously close to it. So the engineers designed the system so that the shape itself carried meaning, independent of the text written on it. Even if you couldn't read the sign clearly, you could still recognize its silhouette. And an octagon has a genuinely unique advantage here. It's the only common shape that looks completely different from a circle, a square, a triangle, or a diamond, even as a rough, blurry outline in your peripheral vision. Think about how often you've caught a stop sign out of the corner of your eye while your attention was somewhere else, maybe checking your mirrors or glancing at a pedestrian. Your brain doesn't need to read the word stop to react. It recognizes that 8-sided shape almost instantly, and your foot is already moving toward the brake before you've consciously processed what you saw. That reaction isn't an accident. It's the literal result of a 100-year-old design decision working exactly as intended. There's one more detail that makes the octagon choice genuinely clever, and it's something almost nobody thinks about. Stop signs are designed to be recognizable even from behind. If you've ever driven past a stop sign facing the opposite direction of traffic, you've probably noticed you can still tell it's a stop sign just from its outline, even though the back of the sign is usually completely blank, with no text or color at all. This matters more than you'd think. especially for cross traffic approaching an intersection from a side street. A driver glancing across the intersection can immediately register that's a stop sign facing the other direction without needing to see its face at all, which helps them understand how the intersection is controlled. A circle or a square wouldn't give you the same instant read from the back because plenty of other signs share those basic shapes. The Octagon's uniqueness works in every direction, not just head-on. Now, here's a twist that surprises almost everyone. The stop sign you're picturing right now, red background, white border, white lettering, wasn't actually standardized until 1954. For decades before that, official stop signs in the United States were yellow with black lettering. The reason comes down to available technology, not preference. Red is obviously the color most associated with danger and stopping across almost every culture. But in the early 1900s, the pigments and reflective materials needed to make a red sign that stayed vibrant and legible at night simply didn't exist yet, or weren't durable enough to survive weather and sun exposure. Yellow pigments, on the other hand, were far more stable and visible in low light using the technology available at the time. So for roughly 3 decades, if you were driving through an American city, the stop signs on your street corners were yellow octagons, not red ones. It wasn't until engineers developed better fade-resistant coatings and reliable red reflective materials in the early 1950s that the sign could finally switch to the red and white design we all recognize today, one that's remained essentially unchanged for over 70 years. Once the octagon and eventually the red color were locked in, something interesting happened. This wasn't just an American design quirk anymore. It eventually spread into an international standard. Countries around the world adopted the octagon specifically for stop signs, even in places where road signs are otherwise written in completely different languages and alphabets. This is actually one of the clearest real-world examples of why shape-based design matters so much for safety. A driver from Japan visiting Mexico, or a driver from Germany visiting Brazil, doesn't need to speak the local language to instantly understand what an octagonal red sign means. The shape itself has become a universal signal, arguably one of the most successful pieces of visual design in human history, precisely because it doesn't rely on text at all. Once you understand why the stop sign looks the way it does, you start noticing the same kind of thinking baked into dozens of everyday objects you've probably never questioned. Yield signs are triangles, pointed downward, distinct from every other common road sign shape. Railroad crossing signs are still circular, carrying that same maximum danger classification from a century ago. Even warning signs for school zones or pedestrian crossings tend to use distinct shapes like diamonds, specifically so your brain can categorize the level of urgency before you've even consciously read a single word. This is the same underlying idea we've explored before with things like keyboard layouts. A decision gets made for very specific, practical reasons at a certain point in time. Then, once millions of people learn that system and it gets built into infrastructure everywhere, it becomes almost impossible to change, even long after the original reasoning becomes irrelevant. The octagon didn't need reflective paint to justify its existence anymore after the 1950s, but by then, it had already become the universal symbol for stop, deeply wired into how billions of drivers instinctively react on the road. You might be thinking, sure, this is interesting trivia, but does it actually matter today? It does, more than you'd expect. Modern traffic engineers still rely on this exact same shape-based logic when designing new signage, because it's been proven over and over and over. Through nearly a century of real-world driving data, that shape recognition genuinely saves reaction time, and reaction time saves lives. Every time you're driving late at night, distracted for half a second, and you catch a red octagon out of the corner of your eye, that split-second recognition is doing exactly what a group of engineers designed it to do back in 1923, long before highways, headphones, phone notifications, or GPS navigation ever existed. It's one of the rare pieces of early 20th century design that hasn't just survived into the modern world. It's still actively protecting people every single day, almost entirely unnoticed. So the next time you roll up to an intersection and stop without even thinking about it, that's not just muscle memory. That's a 100-year-old engineering decision still doing its job perfectly, hiding in plain sight on every street corner in the world. Every object around you is carrying a hidden history like this. We break down another one every episode, so if this kind of thing fascinates you as much as it fascinates us, stick around.